Let's stop and take a look at the ADO.NET architecture and how you might use it in a multiple-tiered application. If we start by looking at the data tier, over here on the right, it's the data tier that provides access to the data. Now, we haven't discussed the various objects you'll be using as part of your ADO.NET experience, but you'll find that the data adapter object is one that allows you to retrieve a data set. The data adapter talks directly to the database, whatever is providing the data, and it provides a client-side to the database anyway, cache of data called a data set. As you'll see, a data set can consist of one or more data table objects. We'll look more in detail at that in different sections. Once you've retrieved the data on your business tier, and this is the place normally you would go out and get the data using business rules to define what data you wanted, you would pass it across the internet or an intranet to your presentation tier. Now, what this represents here is we'll be using XML to pass the data between tiers of the application. Here on the presentation tier, you might be using a Windows Form application. Here we have an executable that displays, for example, maybe a grid of data, which gets a data set passed as XML from the business tier and rehydrates it from the XML back into this programmable object called a data set that you can work with from your application. You can do the same sort of thing in a web-based application. Here, we retrieve the data set passed from the business tier and display it in Internet Explorer on some web page as a data grid object. Now, I know this can be somewhat confusing because you don't think of IIS, that is some Internet Information Server running on the presentation tier. We've sort of collapsed this down to all look like it's on the presentation tier. If you think of it that way, we have here the data set being retrieved by IIS, rendered as a table and displayed on a web page. Just for our convenience, we've displayed all of that as part of the presentation tier here. Also, that XML could go directly to BizTalk server or some other B2B, business-to-business server that takes XML and massages it and works with it in a business-to-business application. Because we're working with XML, it can be used in any environment that wants to use XML. Now, all these demonstration examples we've seen here in the presentation tier all are based around the .NET framework or applications that use XML. If you dig deeper, you'll find that because it's just XML being sent from one tier to another, that presentation tier application could be a VB6 application or an Office application, a Microsoft Office application that knows nothing about the .NET framework. It can use that XML as part of its own application and can display and work with the data because it's just standard XML being passed from one place to another. ADO.NET does this for you by representing that data set object, which you can program against using ADO.NET, as XML as it moves it from one place to another, so that anyone can play with this data, whether they understand data sets or not. We'll dig more into data sets in a different section.